What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from Mtg. We like magic, and Deck Techs season is just about over at this point. We've already seen some Guilds of Ravnica spoilers. In case you haven't seen them, check them out right there. Link in the description. They're pretty good. But like I said, back to the point. Deck Techs season is kind of winding down now, so I'm going to finish it off by doing something a little bit different. This week, I'm going to show you a bunch of rotation-proof decks that are kind of almost there. You know, they have a bunch of obvious pieces. They look like they should exist, but maybe they're waiting on some new pieces from a new set, or maybe there's just something we're all missing. And obviously, like 96,000 heads is better than one, so thanks for the 96,000 subs, by the way. You guys are awesome. But anyway, we'll start this week off with a deck that I've actually been working on for a really long time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off the last week of Deck Tech season with Cynic Lands Matter. Get it? Lands matter. That's why I'm wearing a Captain Planet t-shirt that's like at least a size too small for me. Busting out of this thing, I feel like a sausage. But anyway, back to the point. Again, the reason I wanted to profile this deck first this week is because it's particularly maddening to me. Like, this deck obviously has a ton of really, really good pieces, but what are we supposed to do with them all? So what I'm going to do, as I'm going to do with every deck this week, is I'm going to go through a list that I put together, tell you what the deck is ostensibly appears to be trying to do, and then I'm going to give you a bunch of ideas for stuff we could add to the deck, and then I'll turn it over to you and see if we can get any ideas coming your way. So with that in mind, let's start things off here with exactly what this deck is attempting to pull off. Now, it all starts with two recent and really exciting reprints that are good in other formats, but don't look like they do anything much in Standard. Of course, I'm talking about Scapeshift and Crucible of Worlds, which do at least look like they kind of combo well with each other. Theoretically, you sacrifice lands to Scapeshift, you go get whatever lands you want, you put them into play. But if you've got a Crucible of Worlds in play, you can just play the lands you sacrificed out of your graveyard. Now, this is the major interaction that we're trying to play around here. We have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Those questions being, how do we make it better? Like, how do we make this interaction as good as possible? And how do we actually win the game with it? We have a few ways of doing both. Now, when it comes to strengthening the combo and making this interaction worth playing, a couple of ways we can go about that. We can either break Crucible of Worlds by somehow gaining the ability to play more than one land out of our graveyard every turn, or we can break Scapeshift by just taking all the cards that we sacrificed, all the lands we sacked, to Scapeshift and just putting them back into play. But we have ways of doing both of those things. We have Wayward Swordtooth and the Mending of Dominaria. A Wayward Swordtooth, that's a pretty easy inclusion. You know, seems tailor-made for the deck, too. We can effectively just double our land production. That's exactly where we want to be. And we play, like, the same amount of lands as a control deck. We play, like, 27 lands in this thing. Because, again, we're a lands matter deck. You know, we're going to play more lands than most decks would. So, this is going to give us a bunch of extra land drops over the course of a game. It's decent on turn 3, where into turn 4 and 5, it can help you drop extra lands. But it's also great once you get your Crucible in place and you Scapeshift. You can just end up playing a bunch of lands out of your graveyard just about every turn with this. And once you hit Ascend, it's actually a really good threat. You know, it's a fine blocker in that case, but can also be a great attacker. You know, 5 power and 5 toughness is no joke. 4 bites and your opponent's done. So I'm not going to call it a finisher or anything, but once you do hit the City's Blessing, it's great to have a 5/5 sitting on the board. Now, Mending is a little bit trickier, but it's got the better payoff just in terms of, like, pure numbers. You know, you can do way wackier stuff with Mending. Now, the first couple of chapters will dump lands into your graveyard and help you draw into creatures, which is pretty cool, too. But once Chapter 3 goes off, then if you Scapeshifted that game, you'll get all the lands that you sacrificed back and put them right onto the battlefield, which is obviously pretty crazy. But we've yet to solve the problem of how exactly the deck intends to win the game. It's important. If you're going to play Magic, you should probably at least try to win. You don't have to, but it's nice to occasionally pick up a game. So how do we win? You know, obviously, given enough turns, we can get more land than the government. You know, we've got all the land we could ever want, but how do we use it? So I think maybe the best way of winning the game is probably Sylvan Awakening. At least it's the most boss baller way of winning the game. And if you've got like 14 or 15 lands, you'll probably win off of Sylvan Awakening. I guess it's worth noting that this can turn your lands into creatures, and it lasts until your next turn, so they can like block if you need them to. Like, it's kind of a pseudo fog when you want it to be, but it's probably best used as a finisher for a deck that wants to just have all the lands. And that's exactly what we're doing. Oh my goodness. So we should probably try and win the game off of Awakening. Now, there are some other ways that we could win a game just to hedge our bets. If nothing else, it probably would be nice to have multiple ways of picking up a win in this deck, but I'll go over those a little bit later. By and large, the rest of the slots in the deck are reasonably flexible. We have a lot of options with what we can do here, and although I do want some of these remaining cards to fulfill certain roles, again, we have a lot of freedom with what we can do with the rest of the deck. Now, one card I think we really need to play is Tatiova, definitely. I'll play at least 3 of this lady because she draws us a bunch of cards over the course of a game. Imagine, by the way, scape shifting with Tatiova in play. You draw a bunch of cards and you gain a bunch of life. So that seems like a pretty dope interaction right there, you know. Plus, Tatiova's a threat. If nothing else, she's a creature. You know, if your opponent can't do much, if they're playing control and they just don't have any removal at the time, she can sometimes get through a few damage on her own. But mostly, don't get it twisted, she's a card advantage engine. We need one of those. She's really good at it in a deck that plays a whole bunch of lands. Now, while we're talking about the blue cards in the deck, because there really aren't a whole lot of them, might as well go ahead and tell you about the one main deck copy of Negate that we're running, mostly to protect against Settle the Wreckage. Mostly because that card is horrible and we hate it so much. Now, yeah, there are other uses for Negate, like this counters planeswalkers like Teferi, and yeah, yada yada, nonsense. Mostly, again, the big reason for the main deck inclusion is to counter spells. We can just fight fire with fire and counter spells, or counter Settle the Wreckage, a card that, again, really ruins our day the moment we see it. Now, filling out the remaining slots is a little bit tougher, but I still think there's some really solid stuff we can play. Now, first of all, I want some early interaction, or at least some early board presence, if nothing else, so that we can have a good blocker, but I also wanted to go with our lands theme, and I think the perfect thing for that is Dryad Greenseeker, which is actually a pretty sweet piece for the deck. You know, this draws a land, draws a card, basically, almost 1 out of 2 times, which is a great rate. I'm also going to throw in 4 copies of, oh, you're so sweet, look at this, Bubba. Oh, anyway, but I'm also going to throw in 4 copies of Elvish Rejuvenator here, because again, I want early board presence that goes with our theme. This is ramp, we're playing 27 lands, so it's just, we're never going to whiff on this. It's always going to get us a land, and it's a great blocker to help extend the game for us, to get to these pretty expensive cards. But we'll finish off the main deck here with 1 copy of Multani Yavimaya Avatar, because that should definitely be in. I don't see why you wouldn't put this in. I'm actually thinking maybe 2 copies, but 1 is usually all you need. Again, once you get your engines in place, it's very likely that you'll see this card at some point. And really, you're trying to win with Sylvan Awakening anyway. This is just kind of an alternate win condition that's really, really difficult for them to deal with. But in a lands matter deck, what matters more than the mana base? That makes sense. We've got 27 lands in this deck, as I've mentioned a couple of times. But again, we should probably play extra lands in a deck that wants to play lands. So with that in mind, you know, we've got what you expect. Hinterland Harbor, Woodland Stream. It's kind of boring. You knew that was going to be there. But after that, we get to put some stank on it. We don't necessarily have all the options that I'd really like to have in a deck that just gets to play lands over and over from its graveyard. I'd like some more than this, but who knows what else we'll see in guilds and beyond. So be on the lookout for really good lands, but we do have some good options. Obviously, Field of Ruin is kind of the all-star here. You know, we can sacrifice it over and over, keep playing it from our graveyard with Crucible of Worlds, and that is a pretty good game if you have enough turns to make that a relevant thing. But also know you can do the same tricks with Evolving Wilds. That's kind of nice. Just, you know, eventually you'll get all the basic lands out of your deck, so that's cool. But there's also a couple of different memorials. You know, Memorial to Unity can help you find any creatures that you want to find that are still in your library, so that's kind of nice. You know, if you're looking for a Multani, this is an easy way to find it. But Memorial to Genius is really good, provided that you have enough mana, because drawing a few extra cards every single turn is a pretty big game some of the time. Now here goes the sideboard, and this is actually fairly easy to configure here. You know, we've got Negate and Admiral's Order too, against mostly against Settle the Wreckage. You know, again, we hate that card so much that a lot of our sideboard game plan is in dealing with decks that carry it. Negate, all 3 of the other copies will go in. We'll form the play set. We'll form Voltron Negate to get rid of Settle the Wreckage, and Admiral's Order is even better because it costs, you know, fewer lands. You have to hold back fewer lands to ensure that you can Admiral's Order. So that's pretty nice. And Admiral's Order is just a counter spell when you need it to be, just a hard counter, which is fine against some decks too. Thrashing Brontodon is a pretty flexible sideboard slot, but I still want some way of getting rid of artifacts and enchantments and such. There's also Vivian Reed, which can do that, while also providing card advantage. This is pretty much always going to find a land and occasionally find a creature when it pluses. Now, River's Rebuke is really our only like Wrath option, so we'll play it against aggro, and it's also decent if we plan on Sylvan Awakening. We almost really should never do the two things on the same turn. You know, obviously River's Rebuke costs 6, so if you Sylvan Awakening and then River's Rebuke, you pretty much can't attack with all the lands you just made creatures, so usually you'll River's Rebuke and then Sylvan's Awakening the next turn. And just finish things off, garnish with a couple of copies of Sorcerer's Spyglass to take care of troublesome planeswalkers that we really don't have a lot of options against, and we've got ourselves a sideboard. But there are a few cards that I want to discuss before we get out of here, and before I ask you for your input, because again, I think it's really important that we all put our heads together on this one. But there are some things I want to discuss that didn't end up making it into sort of the preliminary build of the deck. Now, as far as other ways to finish a game off, we could always play Banefire and a single mountain. That would probably work reasonably well. You know, we've got Evolving Wilds and obviously Scapeshift to go get that one mountain when we need it. And if they do settle the wreckage, our attack step, obviously we can just punish them by Banefiring the next turn and using that settle the wreckage to go get that mountain. So that would be something. But I also think that if you want to win in sort of a cheeky way, you could also try Gruesome Fate. You know, just turn all of your lands into creatures and then cast Gruesome Fate and hit them for like 12. That's a possibility. And on that note, by the way, I think adding black might be the easiest path to success here, you know. Black already has a number of decent cards that could work with what we're trying to do, but it will likely get a whole bunch more with the Golgari Guild in Guilds of Ravnica. You know, we know that they love playing around in the graveyard, the Golgari do, so we could dump lands in there and then play them a Crucible of Worlds. Seems like it might be a pretty good idea, but as far as what we already know, I think Stitcher's Supplier is probably a good addition. This is more early board presence that gives us a blocker, soak up some of the damage, stop the bleeding in the early game, but still allow us to dump lands into the graveyard for later use. Adding black would also open us up to some much needed removal, like we'd at least get Vraska's Contempt, which would probably make a huge difference for the deck. You know, the one thing Simic lacks is interaction. It's always been a huge problem with Simic, but adding Vraska's Contempt would actually give us a lot in the way of, you know, flexible, versatile removal. So I think if nothing else, we probably need V Contempt, but I'm just not sure how to open up the slots for it. Adding black would also give us Muldrotha, which is probably one of the best cards we can play. She's a finisher in and of herself, so there's that. She also allows us to play cards or lands out of our graveyard, which is some redundancy with Crucible of Worlds. I like that. And just anything else that we happen to dump into our graveyard with, say, like Mending of Dominaria, for instance. You know, if we dump a Crucible of Worlds in the graveyard for some reason, or another Mending of Dominaria, or after it goes off for Chapter 3, we can just replay it again with Muldrotha, and all of that seems really good. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know your thoughts, all your emotions, and your feelings about this thing, because I want to know. There's so many cards in the format that obviously want to form a shell, a core for this deck, but what's it waiting on? What does it need? But in the meantime, between time, if you just want to look at this deck in a more concise form, then as always, just click the first link in the description and go over to TCG Player's website. They sponsor my content, and if you click that link, they really like it. They do. They call me up. They give me a performance evaluation every few months, and they're like, hey, we see you're getting a lot of clicks. So click the link for me. It actually helps me out just by taking that action. And you can view the deck on their website, and if you do want to go ahead and get any pieces, be mine and their guest. That's pretty much all I got for this one. I'm tapped out for now, but again, your turn. Let me know how you feel about it, and do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. You know, as usual, just like the video. Share the video if you want to. More heads is better. More heads is always better. So, you know, let me know how dumb I am for missing the best card for the deck. It's possible. It's at least possible. So do all that stuff. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, and throw $1 in the Patreon if you really want to help out around here. I would really appreciate that. I'll leave you a link in the description if you're interested. Aside from that, buckle up for spoiler season. You guys were sort of almost officially in it. I guess you could say we're in it because we just saw a bunch of spoilers. Again, link in the description. You haven't seen those yet, but you know, it won't be long that official spoiler season starts. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get all the cards as soon as they're spoiled, or at least as soon as I get a video up. So in any case, I'm pretty sure that's all I got to gab on about for now. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.